And it's a real privilege and honor for me to be here this evening and to address you in this wonderful city of Chicago in this magnificent ballroom here. And my particular thanks to your chairman, Phil Rooney, to your president, Grace Barry, and of course to Mayor Daley as well, a man who I think has now been elected for the fourth time, which for politicians, that's not a bad record at all. You must tell me how you do it. We actually had a marvelous time earlier today in the von Steuben School in Chicago, which then we had a wonderful reception. They were marvelous. I mean, my only slight anxiety was when I read my briefing pack, and it told me that von Steuben was actually a Prussian gentleman whose job it had been to help the American revolutionaries get rid of the British. This is, didn't obviously disconcert me at all, but I also, Mayor Daley's wife, Maggie, actually, we got given this beautiful bench as well, this bench which is wonderfully decorated that I've said should go in the garden of Downing Street, and I mean that, and it will. And what's more, all the British press corps actually heard me say it, and, you know. Well, you know what they say about politicians, their promises. So it will be there. It will be there. I was telling them actually at the school about the unusual gifts that I'd got, and that was certainly an unusual one, only equaled by the one that I got in the south of France when I was given by the mayor of the particular town in the south of France where I spent my holidays 2 years ago, a horse, and that was a live horse too. Well, you can never be sure, but it was actually on, I didn't tell them this at von Steuben, Mayor Daley, but it was actually on that occasion that my worst political embarrassment happened, partly because I was so stunned by being given a live horse. I mean, you normally get a clock. You know, clock, a bunch of flowers, you know, but a live horse, no. So I did, Lionel Jospin, whose constituency was just nearby, the French Prime Minister, he and I did this live press conference together for French television, and I speak French, but I don't speak it perfectly, but they said, oh, come on, you're in France, you're with the French Prime Minister, for goodness sake, speak some French. And we did this press conference live to the French nation, and I was asked the question whether there were any of the policies of Lionel Jospin that I desired to emulate. And I got my syntax a little bit mixed up in French, which is a very, very dangerous thing to do. And I meant to say, I desire to emulate many of the different policies of Lionel Jospin. What I actually told an astonished French nation was that I desired Lionel Jospin in many different positions. Actually, look, in France they're pretty understanding, so but anyway. What I wish to do tonight is to take one step back from the immediate events in Kosovo and try and examine those events in a wider context. Because I believe there are important lessons for our countries and our world in this situation and in these times in which we live. 20 years ago, I ventured to suggest to you that we would not have been fighting in Kosovo. We would have turned our backs on it. The fact that we are engaged is the result of a wide range of changes. The end of the Cold War, changing technology, spread of democratic values, but it is bigger than that. I believe the world is changing in a more fundamental way. Globalization has transformed our economies and our working practices, but globalization is not simply economic. It is also a political and a security phenomenon. We live in a world where isolationism has ceased to have a reason to exist. By necessity, we have to cooperate with each other across nations. Now, after World War II, we developed a series of international institutions to cope with the strain of rebuilding a devastated world. Bretton Woods, the United Nations, NATO, the European Union. Even at that time, in the aftermath of the war, it was clear the world was becoming increasingly interdependent. The doctrine of isolationism had been a casualty of the World War, where the United States and others finally realized standing aside was simply not an option. I would argue to you that today the impulse towards interdependence between countries is immeasurably greater. We are witnessing the beginnings of a new doctrine of international community. By this I mean the explicit recognition that today more than ever before we are mutually dependent, that national interest is to a significant extent governed by international collaboration, and that we need a clear and coherent debate as to the direction of this doctrine as it takes us in each field of international endeavour. Just as within domestic politics, as we can see here in Chicago, the doctrine and notion of community, the belief that partnership and cooperation are essential to advance the individual. Just as that doctrine is coming into its own in domestic politics, so it needs to find its international echo. Global financial markets, the global environment, global security and disarmament issues, none of these, in truth, can be solved today without intense international cooperation. I guess we would all say that globalization is most obvious in the economic sphere. We live, as you know, in a completely new world. Every day, $1 trillion moves across the foreign exchanges, a lot of it in London. Here in Chicago, the Mercantile Exchange and the Chicago Board of Trade make contracts worth more than $1.2 billion per day. It's an extraordinary world, and all the economies have to exist within it. And we're also changing the way in which Northern Ireland is governed. And I just want to say this to you, because I know this is a city with many Irish connections, that we've made great progress in bringing peace to Northern Ireland. And the Good Friday Agreement that we reached last year was a real breakthrough. We've now got virtually everything sorted out in terms of the constitutional settlement, in terms of the institutions of Northern Ireland, in terms of the relationship between the British and the Irish governments. We've got one hurdle to get over, and it's a difficult hurdle, which is the interplay between the new institutions being set up and all the other provisions of the agreement to do with the renunciation of violence. But I'm determined to find a way through. And I want to thank you all here for all the help you've been, and you, Mayor, and all your colleagues. I'm an optimist by nature, and so I believe we will find a way through. And nothing is more important to me or my government than to be able to conceive of a future in Northern Ireland where no one ever asks or cares whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant or whatever religion you are, but you're all human beings sharing Northern Ireland. And that brings me back to the very point of my speech to you tonight. The other big change in the people from my political perspective and in my generation has been the embrace not just of different economic and social, and in my case, constitutional policies. It's also been an embrace of internationalism and a rejection of isolationism. And that is an important part of my political philosophy and my political beliefs. This has been a speech that has ranged over many of the most important of those international issues. And I've tried to give you some insight into our thinking about how we can resolve some of the common problems we face. And I think maybe the time is right for that at the moment. But I want to say one final word on the United States itself. You are the most powerful country in the world and the richest. You are a great nation. You have so much to give and to teach the world. And I know you would say, in all modesty, a little to learn from it too, occasionally. And it must be difficult and sometimes irritating to find yourselves the recipient of every demand, to be called upon in every crisis, to be expected always and everywhere to do what needs to be done. The cry, "What's it got to do with us?" must be heard fairly regularly on the lips of your people and be the staple of many a politician running for office. Yet, just as with the parable of the individuals and the talents, so those nations which have the power have the responsibility to use it wisely. We need you. We need America engaged. We need the dialogue with you. Europe over time will become stronger and stronger, I believe, but its time is some way off yet. And so I say to you, never fall again for the doctrine of isolationism, because the world truly cannot afford it. Stay, please, a country outward-looking, with the vision and the imagination that is the very best of your nature. And realize, too, that in doing so, you will have in Britain a friend and an ally that will stand with you, work with you, fashion with you the design of a future built on peace and prosperity for all, which is the only dream that makes humanity worth preserving. Thank you.